Another genre used by William Shakespeare during the first period of his literary career was the genre of historical plays, which were also called histories or chronicle plays. Um, in other words, these plays are a poetic history of England. In them, Shakespeare gives us a broad panorama of English life, and it is noteworthy that Shakespeare does not focus on the historical facts exclusively in those plays, but instead he also presents some episodes of private life which alternate with episodes of war and political intrigues. He presents all of his characters as human beings. All of them have feelings and thoughts and relations with other people, which makes those plays even more interesting to read or watch. You can see some examples of those historical plays in the screen. They are usually titled by the name of the king, whose life is described in them, like King Henry IV, or King Henry V, or King Richard II, and so on. It seems a bit illogical that dramas like this, full of tragic events and wars and bloodshed, belong to the first period, the happy and the optimistic one. But if we analyze the historical plays in a different order, in the order that they were created in, it turns out that they have a happy ending too, actually. The main message of those histories is that the defeat of the feudal lords is inevitable, and a strong national state is needed, united under the power of one king who will rule it gracefully. And now let's move on to the sonnet, which is the third genre, typical for the first period of Shakespeare's literary work. The first sonnets actually appeared in Italy in the 14th century as a poetical form, and then they were brought to England at the beginning of the Renaissance in translation. But Shakespeare did not use that form of sonnets entirely. He changed it quite a lot. That is why we can speak about two kinds of sonnets. In fact, there was the Italian sonnet, also called the Petrarchan sonnet, which was the original one, and the one created by Shakespeare is the Shakespearean sonnet, quite logically, but it's also sometimes called the English sonnet or the Elizabethan sonnet because it was created during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. I should also remark that some English poets created sonnets following the original model. So their sonnets would be called Italian sonnets or Petrarchan sonnets, because Shakespeare was the first one to change this genre. And that is not so this division is not really about nationality, but it's about the literary form. Speaking about the form, we should say that Shakespeare's sonnets consisted of 3 stanzas of 4 lines. A stanza is a bit of text in poetry that's translated into Russian as strafa. So 3 stanzas of 4 lines gives us 12 lines, and then there was a couplet, the final stanza, which only had 2 lines. So all in all, Shakespeare's sonnets had 14 lines. And speaking about the themes that the sonnets could focus on, there was a certain difference as well. The first kind of sonnets, the Italian sonnets, focused on love exclusively. They could only describe the poet's love for a woman. But Shakespeare expanded those themes actually. He focused on a lot more topics, and some of those were love and loss, loneliness, infidelity, death, and ruthless age. One topic that he was really concerned with was the battle between the power of time and the timelessness of poetry. If his poetry could become immortal, if he could become immortal thanks to his talent. But the two main topics of his sonnets were friendship and love, and all of his sonnets, there were 154 of them, can be divided into two big groups that are joined together by one topic that they share. So the first 126 sonnets are addressed to a certain Mr. W.H., who is Shakespeare's friend. As you can guess, that was quite a scandalous thing to do, because everyone was used to the idea that sonnets were only used to express love, and suddenly Shakespeare writes a sonnet addressed to a man. So there were some, gossips, but actually, Shakespeare's sonnets are quite unusual, and that explains the choice of the topic. So, speaking about Mr. W.H., we don't know who that person is because his full name is never given, but analyzing the sonnets, we can collect some information about him. So, it turns out that Mr. W.H. is a young aristocrat who enjoys Shakespeare's work a lot. And physically, this young man is the embodiment of beauty. He's very handsome, he's just perfect in terms of appearance. But Shakespeare is not only concerned with the physical, but also with the moral beauty of his character, and he does not hesitate to speak about the shortcomings of this person. For example, he points out that his friend is quite arrogant and vain, and also selfish. He says that the young man has no love for anybody but himself, and recommends him to get married and get children as soon as he can. In those times, it was quite a popular idea to say that if a person is attractive physically, then this person is morally good also. But Shakespeare kind of contradicts this idea. He argues with it by saying that um, this man is very handsome, but he's not a perfect person morally. He has a number of drawbacks, but he does not want to hurt his friend badly, so he always portrays these drawbacks as some minor details, and he always makes up for them by pointing out to the good parts of his personality and compliments. And as for the for the second group of the sonnets, I'm sorry, sonnets 127 to 154 are addressed to the Dark Lady. That's a woman that Shakespeare was in love with. And again, it's really hard to say who this Dark Lady was, but we learn a bit about her from the sonnets. So we find out that the Dark Lady is quite young. She's in her early 20s, and she is married, but faithless to her husband. She cheats on her husband with some other men, and Shakespeare admires her beauty and expresses his love for her, but at the same time he realizes that she does not deserve his respect or his love, and he despises himself for that. And things get even more complicated when we find out that Shakespeare's friend falls in love with this lady as well. So she gets in the way of his friendship. And Shakespeare points out several times that the Dark Lady is very beautiful, and he calls her that. He calls her the Dark Lady because of the darkness of her hair and her eyes and her heart. So she's very attractive physically, but she's not a morally good person, definitely. And now I would like us to analyze one of the sonnets in a bit more detail. So here you can see sonnet 130. You can guess that it's one of the first sonnets speaking about the Dark Lady. You can see the composition of the sonnet. It consists of 14 lines, 3 stanzas of 4 lines, and 1 couplet, as we have already mentioned. You can also see the rhyming scheme on the left. It says A, B, A, B, because line 1 rhymes with line 3 and line 2 with line 4. That's also true for the second and the third stanza, and in the couplet, obviously, the 2 lines rhyme with each other because there are only 2 lines. And also, according to some scholars of literary studies, Shakespeare's sonnets are similar to his dramas in a way. So the first 2 stanzas are the part where the conflict is introduced. It is created for the following stanzas to develop. So stanza 3 develops the conflict, and in the final stanza, the couplet, the solution to the conflict is presented, which is very often acute and unexpected and very witty.